Sovereignty isn't something that you just arrive at like a place. It's more like a recognition. And when you do, I think it does feel a lot less like a destination and a lot more like coming home to yourself. So today we're talking about the final stage of the Wild Rose life transition spiral, which is sovereignty. I want to say the final stage. It's not like you reach this stage, it's right at the end, and then you're done, and then that's it. Because it is a spiral, we kind of keep on going, and we'll touch on that in a minute. But sovereignty is probably the furthest up in this process that we've talked about that we can go to. And again, as I've said in other videos, I don't think we kind of do one stage, complete it, move to the next stage, complete that, and then move to the next stage. And I especially see that with sovereignty, is this like back and forward movements. So firstly, I think it's important to say sovereignty isn't like the ultimate place we need to aspire to be. It's not like a power over others. I think there's definitely that really strong connection with our own inner power. And because it's the last stage on the spiral as well, I want to point out it's not somewhere where there's no difficulty anymore. You know, we've cracked it. We've done all the other stages and everything's easy from now on. Having said that, I think sovereignty is like a really kind of inspiring place to be. You know, it's somewhere where, especially when you are in the stages of like descent and even liminal, where you're just feeling so lost and stuck, it can be, you know, a really aspiring place to want to move to. And I think that can help us in terms of like having that sense of forward momentum to be able to sort of move when we're ready. But at the same time, just being mindful that we're not, again, trying to rush to get to this magical place where everything's kind of sorted and we've got a new life and it's all fine now. So some of the signs of the kind of sovereignty phase for me would be this sense of like identity, coherence. So we may have sort of had, when we were at like threshold and liminal, we were feeling confused about who we wanted to be. We may have had that time where we'd started to get in touch with that version of ourselves, that almost future version of ourselves that was living the life, the new life that we were aspiring to get to in like a few steps ahead of us, you know. So that's sovereignty, is where that kind of identity has kind of really started to come online and, you know, it's started to actually exist tangibly in our own reality. And often when we've connected with this sense of identity, underneath it there is a greater sense of sort of self-trust and that connection to our inner power that's a lot more stronger, I think, as we go through the really important phase of integration and rebuilding, which I've talked about in another video. That's the time where we can really start to connect in with that much more solidly, which I think we started connecting with in the liminal, and then as we move through the stages, hopefully it gets stronger and stronger. And by sovereignty, we are really in touch with, like, you want to call it your own intuition, your source of power, just trusting in your own self and your own decisions as well. And so we can make, from this place of sovereignty, we can make a lot more grounded and aligned decisions as well. So when we were in the integration and rebuilding stage, you know, we were maybe starting to test and try out the new and try things on. And it, you know, some things, probably a lot of things, will have not quite gone to plan. We'll have tried some things out and thought, this isn't quite me, or this doesn't quite feel right. And it was that kind of repetitive process of just testing and trying on and maybe course correcting a little bit. And that tends to happen less as we move into sovereignty, because we're really connecting to that sort of identity of ourselves where we can make really grounded and aligned decisions. So decision making about choices of our new life tends to become a bit simpler in some ways. It tends to be a bit clearer to us maybe what decision we should make, because we're really connected to that inner navigation system, to whether something feels off or whether it feels like the right direction to head in. So with that, things are starting to feel a little bit more aligned internally, and this is often the stage where, sort of in the world in general, we can start to see signs of change. So for example, we might have a new career that's taken off and we've got that job, or we might be in a new relationship and that's actually started, or if you are sort of moving into something more meaningful in life, then there are probably signs of that happening in the world around you. Like opportunities will pop up, things that seem like coincidences or fate or whatever they'll just start popping up and things start to really happen in the 3D world, in reality, that maybe before it was all sort of going on behind the scenes and we couldn't quite see evidence of that. And so for me, this is the place for manifestation. So when we talk about like law of attraction, law of assumption, manifestation, this is the best place on the spiral to manifest from, because you are really connected with that true identity and you can make those grounded and aligned decisions, and you're so sort of rooted in, if you will. And that's kind of the place where, when we want to manifest something, we're in the best energy, we're connected with that proper identity, where if we're sort of coming out of, say, liminal, for example, and we're moving towards the threshold even, we might start to be thinking about the new life, and we've got these ideas of what we want. But at that time, our energy, our identity is still a little bit shaky. It's sort of still connected to the old in a way, because we haven't fully shaken that off and we haven't fully stepped into the new yet. So that gives it a little bit of shakiness, so that if we do try manifesting at that point, I think people do and are able to do that, but it's not that it comes through as coherently, and we may find things that don't quite work out how we planned, or maybe even them things that we think we wanted and it turns out actually we didn't want them. I think some of the ways we can kind of see sovereignty playing out as well is this more sort of sense of more surety in ourselves. Not necessarily 100%. I think we can always have sort of self-doubt creep in, and that is actually one of the things that can pull us further back down the spiral. But it's a normal thing to have to deal with. Sovereignty in terms of feeling it in the body, it would be that idea of having our feet on the ground, feeling really kind of rooted and grounded, and really feeling connected into the physical body as well. We can feel like we are fully at home in the body. And when we do that, that's where we can start to work on some other things I've talked about as well in other videos, which is like voice and visibility, especially if you are, you have wounds around being seen, being visible, or speaking your truth, or using your voice. Then getting to this sovereignty stage, or being in this state of sovereignty, is really, again, like manifestation, kind of the best place to be able to work with that. I'm not saying you should wait until you get to that stage. I don't think people should. I think people need to start speaking up where they can with voice, and acknowledging that it will be messy and it will take time, but it is the best stage to really step into that work deeply. And I think in terms of voice as well, you kind of stop editing yourself as much before you've spoken, and you just speak clearly your own truth from your embodied self. And yeah, as I said at the beginning of the video, this isn't like the final stage, we're done, we're finished. It's like we'll probably move back and forwards between kind of sovereignty and rebuilding, it's not set in stone. And also then we can find ourselves in sovereignty and it's all going well, and then bam, we get in another life transition again, because that's the nature of life. We're always going through transitions, big and small. So it's not to think of it as an end point. And I think as well, from another perspective, if you've been through multiple life transitions and you have kind of got to that sovereignty stage before, it can also be a lesson in itself when you go back into fracture and descent of a new a new part of the spiral, a new transition, because then there's that loss of being in that state of sovereignty. If you've sort of already been there before, there's that loss to acknowledge of losing that. So although it doesn't last forever and you may go back in again, if you go through another life transition though and you've got to sovereignty before, it's kind of like you've got the map. And this is kind of what the whole spiral is really. That is like a map to give you a bit of a guide, and so that when you do go through something again, it doesn't have to be as confusing, as stuck feeling as it was the time before. So as I'd love to hear your experiences, and if you feel like you're in the stage of sovereignty, or if you feel you're doing that little dance between like sovereignty and rebuilding, just let me know your experiences in the comments below. Otherwise, there's always my free workshop, which I will pop a link to in the description below, which is finding your footing during a life transition, which again goes through each stage, and we have a little bit of time to kind of orient and work out where you're at, and just again get that map. So take care, and I will see you soon.